So I'm going to be showing a few different demos today. Feel free to ask questions. All of the use cases I'll be showing are kind of real use cases, or what we call value cases, that we know are causing our customers real pain points now. For about the last sort of 6 to 9 months, we've been doing content consultations with a number. We've done at least 10 of these now with our real enterprise retailer customers. Customers have bought this already, and so these use cases are the real ones that we're focusing on, making sure that we can support and can support at real enterprise scale. So this is not just about an AI agent doing one thing. These can be supported at real scale. All of the architecture is there, with the kind of queuing architecture in the background. Our customers know that we can kind of deal at real scale of like big customers like Very Group, big customers like Primark. We're at that kind of level. So these can. So I'm going to be showing a few examples now. The first one I want to show is the kind of sort of product data kind of examples. First couple. So I'm going to sort of start by I'll kick off a run, which is what we call a kind of iteration of a flow, and then I'm going to just explain what's happening. So in this run, in this kind of flow, it's all about getting product data when you have minimal available data. So in this example, we've just got like the product name available to us. Suppliers maybe are not providing enough information for a customer to write their product descriptions. So based on just minimal product data, image name, brand name, and item number is all we've got here. Let's start that running. And I'm going to focus on a few things in this flow. So this is the flow editor, and also the screen where we can like run a flow and go and sort of debug and see what's happening after a flow has happened. This flow here has got it's looking at the product inputs I gave it. So I gave it a product name, product ID. I could have given it some images, and it's figuring out if that's a fashion product or a tech product. In this case, with the first little agent in this flow. So it's basically kind of an agentic flow with different parts broken down. It's then doing some product research. So it's researching using the internet to look for additional information about that product. Obviously, anyone can kind of do that. But we then got an additional agent which is doing attribution specific to tech. So this is where a customer's said, well, we need attribution for this product, but we actually need very specific attribution depending on category. So a tech product, there may even be more granular than this, but in this case, it's tech versus fashion. In a tech product, the attributes I want are obviously related to tech, things like screen size and processor and things like that. Fashion attribution is totally different. That's going to be related to length of the dress and fasteners and things like that. So I'll just show the results of this, then I'm going to go back and show kind of how it worked. So at the end of this flow, a product description has been written out using the customer's kind of product description guidelines, where it's kind of bulleted out the attributes at the bottom. But in this view, we can go back and kind of see what actually happened, how it got to that. So the previous few steps, so we can see it figured out it was a tech product, not a fashion product. Research agent searched the internet and identified product information. But to ensure we're getting not just like all the product information, but only the bits the customer's interested in, the next part of the flow has actually ensured that it's returning that in a kind of JSON format, which is according to the customer's kind of requirements.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you set things like tone of voice, so fashion, for example?
Yes, we can do. Yeah, actually, my next flow will have a tone of voice example in it. This flow is more related to kind of getting the exact data format. We can add a tone of voice into this, but I'll be showing one in a minute. This flow is kind of all about the actual fields. This is going to look a bit techie, but essentially we're defining the fields that the customer wants in their attribution and ensuring only those fields are supplied and that they are all supplied. So this is kind of what the attribution flow is doing. Customers content teams won't need to be like using this screen though. So we've got a human review as a kind of first-class feature. So as we're talking about a kind of enterprise scale, customers' content teams just want to be very quickly checking that content, approving or rejecting it. So we have a review dashboard where those kind of reviews are showing up. So you can see our kind of tech product descriptions showed up here. Content teams can come in, check the content. They can even edit it here if there are things they're not happy with it, and kind of approve or reject. And once approved and rejected, the workflow will continue and maybe push that data into their PIM or into their CMS, depending on what it is. The interesting thing about that was the kind of JSON structured output. So this is actually a new feature we've just added in, whereas rather than having to kind of ask an LLM to give me some JSON, we were actually able to take advantage of JSON schema and tell the LLM you must return the data in this exact JSON format, which is kind of a new feature in some of the LLMs we're able to take advantage of. And for this attribution use case, it's very important. So next flow, I'm going to show also a product description flow. I'm going to kick this one off as well with kind of similar, well, it's different content. I'll do a fashion example this time. So this is a similar flow. So because we're working with enterprise customers, it's never the same. All of our customers are different. So some of them will have this, be very keen on having the attribution exact. Other customers, brand rules is going to be more important. Some customers, all of those things are important. So with Workforce, we know we can't just build product description features and it'd be the same for everyone. We've built lots of different building blocks, and it's all basically configurable depending on the customer's needs. So in this case, we're doing similar kind of research, and then we've got a brand rule agent. So what the way the brand rule agent works, I'm going to show that, is a lot of our customers have very big brand guidelines document. It might be 100 pages of PDF or something like that. Often they built up over several years and never really kind of normalized all that. We're working with customers to figure out how that really works in the world of kind of AI. So in this case, if you give a huge brand guide to an LLM and just say, give me a product description using this brand guide, that's going to overwhelm it with information. This brand agent, we're able to give it a brand guide, give it rules like, for example, for homewares, if it's bedding, don't put the color in the title, all of these kind of rules. For accessories, call out the material. The agent will look at the product inputs and decide which of those rules are actually important and relevant for this particular product, and then pass only those rules on to the next step in the flow. So if I look back at that, back into human review, hopefully that's the one's finished. So the product description that's been generated from that is this short product description. And if we look at the run, we should be able to see what happened. So the brand rule agent step analysed the guidelines, and it found these guidelines that are specific to women's wear. And it's only used those particular guidelines in this case. So that's kind of our current iteration of how we're working with kind of brand guides. And we're kind of building on this. I think the next step, some of the future steps of this might be storing the brand guides in a document rather than in the interface here. But this is an example with brand guides anyway. You had any other questions around the brand guidelines?
Not brand guidelines, but the attribute shape that you did in the first example. Curious to know if there's any integration with Amplience schemas, which are sort of slightly different from JSON schemas.
Well, Amplience schemas are JSON schema actually, so we use JSON schema in a CMS as well. So really, no, there's no difference. They're both JSON schema. So this is a new feature for us, and at the moment you can basically just paste in a JSON schema. It could be the same schema you have in CMS. Our next iteration is going to be get the schemas from the CMS. So we'll have an action that goes and retrieves all the schemas from the CMS, and then you could potentially choose those ones. But yeah, it basically is exactly the same feature, and we're kind of like, it's sort of like worked out well for us because all of the LLMs work with JSON schema very nicely.
The reason for my specific question there is that those schemas have conditionals in them. So is it capable of handling the conditionals?
Conditionals such as like required fields and things like this.
Amplience schemas in your editor, you can say, if I have this field being X, then present these properties.
Oh, I see, yeah. Well, I haven't worked with one of those yet. This is only released on Friday. but yeah, basically the way the schemas work with the LLMs might be slightly different, and we'll be kind of obviously figuring out that over time. We haven't done that, get the Amplience schemas part yet, but we will be working on that. But I think the same things apply, like having required versus optional fields, and we're also building into the prompting, like if you don't find a value, so with this particular example, we're researching, you still need to have a value, so we need to build into the prompt what to do when you don't find anything on the internet. And yeah, so you're still going to have some validation in the schema, but it'll be different because it's not a human filling it in. It'll be more like having rules in the prompt what to do when you don't find the information and things like that. So the next kind of category of pain points that's coming up a lot is sort of AEO or GEO or SEO, this kind of space basically. So that is a lot of customers wanting to generate a lot more content, particularly like editorial content for their products. So like FAQs, buying guides as examples. So the next example I'm going to show is around that. I'll kick this off, and I also want to talk through a few features here. So I'll just do the same kind of product information I just did. So what this flow is going to be using is a similar research agent, but researching for frequently asked questions, kind of content around those products. There's a different prompt in the research agent. Rather than asking for attributes, it's asking what are the common questions people ask about this type of product. And then we've got an FAQ generator custom template. Now a custom template is basically a prompt that is managed and templated. There's basically a single prompt to do one thing, and custom templates are really around generating content. We also have agents, which are more autonomous and able to do kind of more like workflows and use tools and use the kind of JSON schema. Custom templates are really focused on generating content and making sure that's repeatable and that you can test that content generation. So in this case, it's generating FAQ content. So we've defined certain inputs to that content and defined the structure of what an FAQ targeted for kind of this AEO use case is, what do I call it, GEO this time, is meant to look like. So that flows using this particular template. So I've now got my human review come up for the FAQ. And that looks like this. And with this particular flow, once I approve the review, it will jump back in. If I jump back into the run, you can see that the flow is connected to Amplience dynamic content. So this will actually create that FAQ that you've just seen inside dynamic content. We have a folder in dynamic content where they should be appearing. And yeah, I think that's this one here. So this shows kind of end-to-end with the CMS, how you could quickly create that kind of FAQ content. And the next flow I'm going to show kind of builds on this same use case, and just again just shows all the different ways we can do these kind of use cases. So
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can it take inputs of what has been successful in the past?
In terms of sort of learning from previous results,
Yeah.
We don't have like a learning loop built in at the moment on these flows. You could have some kind of flows where the confidence scores and going back into a loop, but we don't sort of train any models, for example, in these flows.
Could we attribute that? Could we say, here's a report, go and have a look at this and make your choices on the back of it?
Yeah, you certainly could make reports and then feed that back in. Yeah.
If you've got a system or an API, you can quite quickly create a connector that could then use that connector to kind of retrieve back information that's been successful, feed it back into the generation, and go, I'll make it a bit more like this. This has been successful.
Yeah. So we have talking about kind of connectors. So this particular example has an integration with Amazon Q Business. So we have what we call our kind of extension architecture, where you can build kind of either your own custom logic or build integrations with other platforms. And some of these will be built by Amplience and published by us in our kind of marketplace. You could also, as a system integrator, build kind of private extensions for one customer, or as an ISV, you could build like an integration that's published into our marketplace by us. So in this example, we've got one of our first connectors is an Amazon Q Business connector, which basically Amazon Q Business is Amazon's kind of co-pilot of your kind of intranet data that you've stored in Amazon. So in this case, it's basically it's like a vector search of like documents that are stored in Amazon or in things that are connected to Amazon Q Business. So we could have like an integration with a review platform here, and you can go off and get data from a review platform easily, yeah. So this is just an example of that. The other things going on in this example is a webhook triggering. So we wouldn't normally expect people to be going in and clicking run. That's just kind of for demo, for building flows and for testing flows, we'll be clicking run, but most of the time it's going to be triggered by an automated process. So this process is connected to Jira. So this Jira board here, the individual Jira tickets are kind of like, they're meant to be basically a content brief. So this is a content brief asking for a product guide about Adidas Terex footwear. So I'm just going to actually pull in a load of these tickets, and it should kick off a load of runs for that workflow. So I'll just have a look at the runs there. So see, these several runs have just kicked off. And what that's doing is going through the flow and searching Q Business for that product search to see if there's any data in Q Business. In Q Business, we've just got some CSV, basically some Excel documents storing some draft product data. So it's product data is not available on the internet. It's our internal product data in a spreadsheet. That's the kind of thing you might have in Amazon. So it's basically searching Amazon for that product data, then just generating a product guide based on the results it finds. So that's a product guide for multiple products, not just one product. I'm going to go through to the review screen. Because I kicked off lots of runs, this is where kind of human review comes in really handy, because I can filter by that particular flow, which is the product guide one. And you see I've got loads of product guides waiting for a review here. I can just run through and review those. I could just click approve, and then once that's approved, I can just carry on and approve the next one. Check that and approve. So the idea is the reviewer just quickly goes through and clicks next, clicks approve. And again, with this flow, again, it's connected to Amplience dynamic content. So all of those ones I approved will appear in dynamic content in this kind of, I think it's this editorial folder here. So that's kind of an even more of an end-to-end flow with full automation from Jira, ending up in dynamic content. Your content team don't need to know about anything except Jira and dynamic content and the review step.
But the question of this is very interesting. Is let's say you've got an objective to add once a month to all of your engaged customers on your site to send a email campaign through Braze that talks about the current trends that are really good for you. Right?
Yeah.
So let's say you've got Braze, Akeneo, Amplience, and Constructor all tied together. And you're getting your pod free from Akeneo. You're getting all the content generation stuff in here already. You're getting your trend data from Constructor as well.
Yeah.
And you bring it all of that together to send out via Braze. Could this automatically create, based on personas or any data we bring in, say in the content based on trends and your browsing history, and then send that to you every month about things you should be engaging in?
Yeah, so as long as you have a way to get that data from those different systems. So if they've got APIs, we can build extensions to reach out to those APIs, and also build prompts that understand, what that data looks like, and then basically pull it all in. So in the workflows, essentially, if we look back at the workflow, we've got the product guide here. So in the workflow here, we can choose data from anywhere else in the flow to pull in. So this is where we if you've got lots of connectors further up, the data from all of those previous steps is available to our prompt, and then you can use that as an input to the prompt. So you can build one prompt using little bits of data from here and there. And we've also got helpers to help you kind of transform that data into different shapes, etc. So as a kind of a system integrator or Amplience service team helping our customers build the flows, we'd be kind of figuring all of that out, looking at the end-to-end flow and figuring out what needs to be built. And then we've got building blocks to build parts of that. For custom things, you might need to build custom bits of code, for which we have our kind of extension kind of architecture. And then we also have just simple helper to get HTTP requests. So you can get from an API with just a standard action as well. And it's kind of, because it's basically a workflow engine, how kind of you can make it more or less autonomous. So you can basically have it very deterministic, just based on get this bit of data, do this, or you can have it more agentic, where you're letting the agent make more decisions. So we have where we have kind of agents in here, those are kind of more autonomous and have access to tools and can do longer living tasks. And whereas we have this palette of actions with kind of the more building block kind of tasks as well. So some of our customers, they don't want to be very autonomous, they want to be more deterministic, and some will be more interested in being, and also depending on the use case.
One other question. Let's imagine we're working with a client and delivering their content. We'd have a point of review internally, and then we would push that to the client and say, you're happy with it, can we publish? Can you put those multi-layers of content review within your workflows?
Yes, you can. So you could have you can have as many review steps as you want. So one of the review steps could be like, is it ready to publish? And the next step after that could be a publish. Also with our other products, so if it was using our CMS, we obviously have more preview tools available in the CMS. You might want to do the publish in the CMS. There might be a different way to do the review in another system if you want to do that as well. So you can either do multiple review steps inside the workflow, or if there's already existing review, like in a PIM, you often have, you're reviewing all the product data might come together in the PIM. You might want to have that last before publish review in the PIM, or you might want to have it here. So it's kind of flexible, yeah. I'm going to show a few image use cases now. So another common pain, because we're DAM as well as CMS, our customers are using us for delivering images at scale and also for managing for storing their imagery, and particularly for product imagery. And one of the common pain points for this is standardization. What customers would like is their product listing page to look nice and everything to be nice and aligned in their house styles, basically. House styles will be consistent size, consistent padding, consistent alignment, and consistent background color. So this is a more deterministic use case actually that we're working on. So for this, we've worked with a couple of customers, particularly on this, and this is the kind of workflow that this is a sort of basic version of this workflow. We've got two main actions that we built for this. Cropping action. Cropping does more than kind of just a crop. It's basically using AI to isolate a product and then cropping around that product using a defined crop guide. The crop guide is basically the canvas, width and height, the padding around the object, and the alignment of the object within the canvas. So I'll do a quick run for this one. Let's do that for a shoe. So this shoe's got a weird background color. Let's start to run with that one. And I'm just going to show you back to the shoe so that after it does the cropping and alignment, so sometimes depending on the aspect ratio, you can end up with transparent pixels or white space if you're kind of expanding into a different aspect ratio. And also for the kind of background color side of things, so this normalized background action here allows you to define a background color, but it's doing a bit more than just applying a background color. This is using actually an LLM with a prompt that we've designed to actually normalize the background. So it's basically changing the background color to a standard background color, but whilst keeping any of the details of the original background. So it's keeping things like shadows, or if there was like a wall in the background, it might keep it there. And part of that, it will also fill in those transparent pixels if you end up with those transparent pixels. So I'll just look at those reviews for that one. So we've got, I think this was, so you can see the original image looked like this. So with the original image, so no, that's the crop, sorry. The original image was 3000 pixels by 2400 and sort of centered almost in the middle. And then the new image has got this the padding we defined and is aligned to the bottom within that canvas with the new image dimensions. I'll click through, there's a few more of these in a review, awaiting review here. So that's kind of a very common use case. And again, this is more deterministic. So you, actually with this use case, we don't really expect customers to need to do the human review step. Once they're comfortable with this workflow is working for them, they can just turn it on and leave it running, and these product images will just appear in the DAM and be available. And sort of using all of our, if they're using our DAM, all the existing DAM features can then just work as they currently do. So we can run this as a loop. So I could have put a loop in this and it would run through all of the images you added if you wanted to use the UI for this. But as I say, most of our customers will be using this on an automation. So it'll be more likely they'll do a bulk upload into their DAM. That bulk upload will trigger a webhook, which will trigger the flow. So if they're using our DAM, they can do that. They can use their existing workflow to upload images. They've probably already got that set up. It's already using FTP or APIs to upload images into our DAM. Our DAM system already has webhooks. You just have to set a webhook to trigger the flow. And if they're using a different DAM, they don't have to change their existing process for uploading images. They can keep their existing process, just trigger off a webhook for this bit. And then the end of this flow can send it back into the DAM. I'm going to do one, I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I'm just going to do one more image example that's come up as part of that process of consulting on the product imagery problems, is creating swatches. So customers currently create kind of color swatches manually, basically in Photoshop. It's quite time consuming, they have to do it for a lot of images. And one of the things they're saying is every person who creates a swatch will do it differently. There's no standardization really. So we've developed, again, it's kind of an LLM-based process. I'll click on a similar one. Do this one for the leggings again. So this is an LLM-based process that looks at the image. We can actually pass in a input to say, if it's a complicated image, we could say the product category is handbag, but usually it's a model carrying a handbag. We can say, do a swatch for the handbag, and it will look for the handbag and then do a swatch for that. So it's basically a bit more complicated than some automated swatch tools just look for the center of the image. We're not doing that. It's using an LLM to actually, I'll just show a previous run of that. So a few previous ones for swatch. So this one passed in a hat and it's generated the swatch. So the swatch is actually smaller than that, it's just that size. It also generates a HEX color and a RGB color as well. So this was one for these leggings. Done a couple of them for some reason. And this one where it's found, we passed in the handbag as the product type, and it's found the handbag and generated a swatch for the handbag rather than the top there. So yeah, so you can see these kind of image use cases, they're still using AI, but they're simpler and more likely to succeed. So you're less likely to need kind of human review over time. And then these are also the really high scale problems. So customers are talking about, in some cases, like it's quite common to be 1,000 images a week, can even be a lot more than that amongst their customers. So they don't really have time to do the human review step anyway. It would just add more burden. Yeah. Any questions? Got plenty of other things we could show, but we can talk about those later, can't we? Yeah.
How integrated is it inside of content editing? If I have a piece of content that I want to, this seems quite powerful in terms of extensibility. I could create any workflow, whether it has AI or not.
Yeah.
Is there an existing integration for if I want to run an automation workflow on content type A?
We don't yet have like an in-product feature run workflow, but that's definitely roadmap kind of thing. But we have extensions in dynamic content, so it's very easy to build an extension that will trigger a workflow with just a button in your form. So basically, the current UI extensions features it's very easy to trigger.
So all API based in terms of integration.
Yeah. So you basically all you have to do is send. So we can have a trigger. It's called a webhook trigger, but it basically just receives a HTTP request. So you can either do that from a button that sends an HTTP request, or you can use the webhooks feature in DC to trigger the workflow. So we've got built-in features to do it already, but not a kind of top-level run workflow feature yet. But that's coming.
Quick question on some of the output from this. So in terms of content generated, both text and images, presumably this you could bake in all the usual stuff around accessibility and contrast, and as well as your typical brand guidelines and that kind of stuff. So you're generating background colors based on guidelines and
So the background color, or the one I was just showing, you just enter your hex code, your RGB code that you want. You could make that. You could pass in the code from a previous step if you wanted to. We have a very well kind of tested alt text flow, so we can generate alt text. We also can generate video captions as well. We've done a lot of accessibility kind of work already. Alt text is one of the first use cases where we kind of already had the alt text feature working with a lot of our customers before we had the kind of content flows part of Workforce, and now we're bringing that all into the content flows as well to make it more flexible.
Thanks, Ollie. I think we're going to have a break now. Michael, for half an hour.